Hello.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you well.
Welcome to 2021. It's January the 15th. We've been off air. That was the week, has been off air for what, 3 weeks. Keith Tier had the audacity, the cheek to go to South Africa for 3 weeks. I don't know how he did it or why he did it. And I don't know how he actually got either in or out of the country, but he's managed to return. I guess, Keith, unfortunately, not much has happened in the 3 weeks you were away, especially on the political front. So you
Yeah, yeah,
missed much, did you?
not really. I got a lobster-like suntan, and apart from that, the world just seemed to stop doing anything. Or
Well,
is
of
that
course,
just me?
our British irony might be lost on some of our audience. The last few weeks, particularly the last 2 weeks, has been anything but unexceptional, uneventful. And Keith's that was the week newsletter for January 15th, 2021, is entitled, appropriately enough, On Liberty, Borrowing or Remixing John Stuart Mill's famous 19th century book. So, Keith, unfortunately, we don't really disagree. I think we're probably in a minority, but we don't disagree on your take on whether or not Trump should have been thrown off Twitter and whether or not big tech should have essentially conspired to disable Parler. What's your position on this, though?
Well, I think it's probably worth starting with what I think about Trump, just so no one
Yeah,
misses.
I mean, that's given. Everyone hates Trump.
Well, not just hates him, but I believe that he broke the law, that he did lead a riot, sedition as it's called, and that he, unless Biden chooses for political reasons to pardon him, he probably should be tried and go to jail. So I don't want to sound like I'm soft on Trump, but I'm very hard on the meaning of liberty and free speech and the role of social media in that. There's this narrative that says, well, social media is private companies, so they can do what they like, and that seems to be, technically speaking, a lot of people believe that's legally true. Although in the newsletter, I quote a case that the Supreme Court tried in 2017 when the state of North Carolina tried to ban a child molester from social media. He went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court made the judgment that social media is now so all pervasive that it constitutes a public square, and that it is not okay to deny someone permanent removal from it. And that was,
Yeah.
and that the First Amendment does apply. Therefore, so that case is on the record.
So this is Keith Tier being John Stuart Mill. Let me quote you something from the top of the newsletter on liberty. This is one area where maybe we can find some controversy. You say, commercial interests owning platforms used by the majority of society as a modern printing press are no more suited to deciding what is allowed to be published than the first printing press owners were suited to deciding what newspapers were allowed to print, or you might say books. So
Yeah.
my only issue with that is whether or not the social media companies are the equivalent of the newspapers or books being published on those printing presses or something else. So, for example, could we argue, Keith, that Twitter or Facebook is the equivalent of a modern newspaper, a 21st century newspaper, whereas it's the pipes, it's the stack behind Twitter and Facebook, which is the equivalent of the modern printing press. So, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
Amazon Web Services is the modern printing press, and they enable Twitter and Facebook. Is that fair?
Well, let's just start by saying there's no right answer here, because
No, well, we know that, but
this is all being defined live. I actually think of it differently than you just said. I think that Amazon is like the trucks that drive the newspapers to the newsagents to be sold. It is the pipes. It's
And
raw.
it's the printing. It's literally the printing press.
Well,
AWS.
not really. I think software is the printing press. I think hardware is the pipes, and software is the printing press. And the software enables publishing, but doesn't publish itself. And then we use the software to publish. You and me and everyone else, we use the software to publish. So we're like the newspapers or the books. And now the reason that is not entirely true is that during the last several years, many people have pressurized Facebook and Twitter to be more than a printing press and to become an editor. And they have done that. They've become editors. So now they've really crossed the line from printing press to books and
well, the problem is, and this is a big gray area, and you and I have been arguing about this for years, and it's still not entirely clear that there is no equivalent, because Facebook and Twitter are, in one sense, I guess, they're the printing press, and in another sense, they're the newspaper or the book. Yeah. And I think the people who think they're the newspaper or the book think they need to become censors in the way that publishers or newspaper editors are quote unquote censors, although I don't like that word, just formal editors, mediators. And people like you see them as you say, the trucks schlepping the papers around. I mean, the reality is there's no exact analogy, and they're neither, and yet both. And so we got to come up with new categories, new language, maybe new laws.
Yeah. So what I argue in the newsletter, and this is not yet the case, despite the Supreme Court decision in the case I quote, is that the First Amendment, and by the way, this is all country specific. So this is what I'm about to say is about the US, but it would be different in the UK or Spain or anywhere else. The First Amendment should be extended to include social media. That is to say, you cannot incite violence, and it also spells out what you can do. At least as long as nation states rule the world, every nation state is going to have its equivalent of that. We already know, for example, that Apple in China alters what's in Apple News based on government policy. So when Zuckerberg begs the government to be the arbiter here, he's kind of right. The government should be the arbiter, and the law should be what you have to apply.
But the thing is that everything's getting confused. One of the things that struck me this week was Airbnb's decision unilaterally to decide that they weren't going to allow people to rent or to cancel all the bookings in Washington, D.C., which isn't their business. The government didn't ask them to. Maybe they've done it now. But there's such a blurring of the lines between private tech companies and the government in the US, partly, I think, because the US government is so dysfunctional, and partly because the platforms are so powerful and well-financed and aggressive in terms of shaping the agenda and also marketing their brands, that there's this confusion now between big tech and government.
Well, I think it comes down to clear law. If the law is clear, and companies, because they are part of the market within a legal structure, would have to apply the law. But if the law is either silent or non-committal, then companies will interpret.
As you say, I mean, the law needs to adapt in the same way as in the late 19th century, the law adapted to photography and new technologies. There's clearly ways in which the law and the judiciary has to catch up. Yeah. So, by the way, because this is a show about innovation and entrepreneurship rather than politics, where do you see the opportunities in entrepreneurial terms for this confusion? Because there are going to be remarkable opportunities for entrepreneurs and media people to sort of slip between the cracks and take advantage of changes both in the law and in public sentiment. Are there going to be alternatives to Twitter? Parler will probably reappear. It'll find an appropriate AWS. Are these rival platforms to Twitter and Facebook realistic?
Interesting enough, Jack Dorsey yesterday did a long tweet stream in which he suggested an alternative. It's right at the top of the newsletter, where he clearly is incredibly uncomfortable with what Twitter has done in the last week, even though he defends it. And he in this long tweet stream, he makes the point that there's an initiative inside Twitter called Blue Sky. And what Blue Sky is an attempt to use Bitcoin-like architecture of a distributed network with trust built in to create a social media platform that is fully distributed and is not owned by anyone and has no authority governing it. And then that Twitter would simply be a client to that stream.
Yeah, that's back, Keith. Do you remember when you did Santa Cruz Networks? That was your old game there, selling servers rather than media products.
Well, selling a true, what he's really done is he's defined the line between a platform and a service, which is a blurred line today. And he's saying he would like there to be a platform that he doesn't own and Twitter doesn't own, and all of us can publish onto. And then Twitter would take a feed, if you like, and build a user interface on top of it.
Yeah.
And he would hope that Facebook would do the same.
It's so like a public utility in which private companies could sit on above. Is that fair?
Yeah, very similar
to a layer. It would be the foundational layer, and then we build our platforms, our media companies on that.
And that's very like the way email works. There's a protocol called SMTP, or the way the web works with HTTP. It becomes a protocol and a platform that they build on top of. Now,
is this, I can't stand how in agreement we are, Keith, but is this realistic? I think it's a great idea.
It's very realistic, technically speaking, and he does have a team, and he's hiring, by the way. Anyone listening who's an engineer, they're hiring into this.
But isn't that a contradiction in terms for Dorsey and Twitter to do it? Don't we need a Berners-Lee to come along and build it?
Well, he might be the Berners-Lee because he's open sourcing it. Jack. He's trying to open source it and make it free. And
he needs to shave off that beard if he wants to be Berners-Lee. I think.
I agree with you. Another point of agreement, Andrew. Now back to alternatives. The other option is what you could think of as balkanization and bubbles. So Parler is a balkanized bubble. I joined it. I don't know if you did, just to see what was there. And it was mainly rabid right-wing.
Steve Gilmore know you joined Parler, and he's still having you on his show?
Well, he knows that I didn't join it because I agree with it. I joined it to be an observer.
And my guess is 95% of people on Parler are coastal elites like you, checking out the racists and the fat white guys on there. It's probably no one really honest.
Maybe 10%.
It's like a Borges story. Remember that Borges story where people he was recreating the crucifixion of Christ, and he showed up, and everyone was journalists time traveling to see what was going on. I think Parler isn't for real either.
So somebody's asking to say the name again, and I think it's Parler is the name he means. And that person also said Berners-Lee said he was doing the same thing 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think Berners-Lee's a bit old. I mean, we need a new Berners-Lee, a younger. He's still kind of trying to recreate the web. We need a social media equivalent of Berners-Lee. There must be tons of people out there.
Honestly, I think Jack Dorsey is the nearest to it if you read what he said.
What about you, Keith? You could be the Berners-Lee.
I'm British, that helps.
The problem is there's no money in it. I mean, you'd only need Berners-Lee gave away the web, but no one's going to do that again, will they? I mean, I think that's realistic. You're smiling, or you're frozen. I think you're frozen. I think he's so shocked that he could be Berners-Lee, he's frozen. I don't know if this is still broadcasting. Keith, you still alive?
Wow, that was weird. We were completely off the air. Everyone's still watching, by the way.
Oh,
Uh,
good. Well, I think that was Berners-Lee. Uh,
and Penny said it is broadcasting. Thanks, Penny. Long
Thank you.
time
Yeah,
no see,
so
by
to
the way.
come back, because this is a really interesting conversation, Keith. What about the role of why can't the government be Berners-Lee? Isn't that the point of government, to create public utilities in which private citizens and entrepreneurs can build stuff?
You know, it's funny. The Biden today, there was this whole discussion whether he should have a technology council. I'm not a big believer in top-down anything, and
Yeah.
governments just can't do it. So it's got to be bottoms up. It probably has to be engineering-led. It has to have a philosophy, which I think distributed and trustless networks are a philosophy, and a good one. So my view is, you basically get open platforms, free speech. Um, the
But
only
also accountability. I mean, you can't
accountability should
you
be the
can't
law.
call for, killing people and get away with it. There's got to be some accountability, as there is in the real world.
Yeah, but who administers accountability should be somebody with a judicial authority or executive authority. It shouldn't. It should be start with the law, and then who executes the
Yeah,
law.
I mean, in my view, and this is perhaps part of a broader conversation, to me, the biggest problem with all this stuff is the anonymity. And if you could build this platform in which people would have to appear as themselves, then people would be more accountable, and you wouldn't have any of this nonsense. And then when you called for hanging Pence or something, and clearly it was illegal, you would be accountable. But that's another conversation. So
Yeah.
what's going on, Keith? You've been following up on all this news. Is anyone saying anything original on this dilemma for me? By the way, I think that I kind of agree with you on government in one way, but I disagree in another. I think government have to be involved, and this is a much better use of government infrastructure and innovation than regulation. I mean, everyone's thinking of government purely in terms of regulating social media. We need to present government with a more interesting opportunity, a more creative opportunity, and maybe it can rise to the occasion.
Yeah, even then, Andrew, you're an optimist on government. I think the best you can expect from government is clear laws, and even that's hard to achieve. But clear laws, and then let everyone get on with it. You talked about anything innovative. This is the list of stories under this heading in this week's newsletter. If you read through the list, The Economist has a great piece on big tech and censorship. The subtitle is "Don't Let Silicon Valley decide on free speech," which I thought was a great piece. Angela Merkel saying she finds it problematic.
I'm very brave of Merkel. I mean, she's always the voice of reason, and the fact that she's clearly no fan of Trump and yet was very unsympathetic to throwing him off, I think really reflects very well on her.
August Miller agrees that clear laws are needed. Now, if you go further
law,
down,
by definition, is never clear, because this is a country of lawyers who are all paid to muddle the law and be paid to reinterpret it and argue about it. So that's not going to happen either.
Yeah, Spiked Online is interesting. It kind of broadens it out, and it labels it the woke purge. This is Spiked Online this week. The woke purge. Brendan O'Neill, the editor, and the point that's being made is that the woke, which I guess is another label for left identity politics led left liberals, are becoming authoritarian, and what has happened this week has been the attack on the Capitol triggered the authoritarian left. Dorsey and Zuckerberg are kind of really not very happy recruits to that. They're very uncomfortable with their role. But the authoritarian left, which seeks to silence those it disagrees with, got the upper hand.
I think that authoritarianism, as you say, exists both on the left and the right. And given the situation, the authoritarian left certainly has a better hand of cards to play at the moment. But the authoritarian right
Yeah,
I mean, I
clearly
think
not.
I would still argue there are probably more authoritarians on the right. I mean, I consider myself non-authoritarian left. I
Yeah,
also think that this whole event in DC has created what America specializes in is paranoia. And it's exactly like after 9/11. The
what do
whole
you think?
country now has become paranoid. I mean, after 9/11, it was one catastrophic event that was a one-off event. This was a one-off event too. So the whole country now is paranoid, and it's going to last for the ramifications of this are very disturbing on lots of freedom fronts, I think.
What did you think of this article, by the way? This is Kara Swisher in the New York Magazine. It's time for social media platforms to permanently ban Trump. Is that part of the paranoia, or is
I think
what do you think?
it's. I mean, permanently banning Trump is absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ban him, you ban half the country. 75 million people voted for him, and it's just absurd. I mean, you can try and control him some way. And anyway, if you ban him, you make him the story. The biggest challenge, if you really hate Trump, to me, the biggest challenge or the biggest to weaken Trump is to figure out a way that we can forget him, because he is the attention president, and his value is in attention. He is the ultimate figure for the attention economy. So we got to figure out a way to forget him. And if you ban him, then his ghost is everywhere. And then we spend our whole time thinking and talking about him. He's going to go away. He's kind of politically irrelevant now. I
John
think with
Fitzgerald is
hopefully he'll get banned from running from office, and he'll just become an angry old white guy playing golf. We can forget it.
We have can you see that, Andrew? I'm putting a chat that somebody has typed in. So his previous one was this: the right is woke with lies, and it's kind of interesting. The word truth and lies.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to your friend John Stuart Mill. You know, Mill didn't believe in on liberty, that there was the whole point of an open society for Mill was there was no single truth, and no one knew it anyway. So you had to keep society open enough for us to debate it, and every generation sees truth differently. So he wasn't an absolute relativist, and he argued that we shouldn't be allowed to do things that hurt other people. Yeah. But I think you're right to go back to Mill's On Liberty. I think it's a really good book and worth revisiting, particularly today.
I almost went back to Milton, who petitioned the British Parliament to allow anybody to run a printing press. It was all about licensing of printing presses. So that was 1614 or something like that, 16 something. So this problem is not a new problem. It's who do you trust with information? Doc Searls this week has a great piece, How to Save the World. And he champions smart people as being in large enough numbers and on social media to ultimately win any discussion.
Yeah, but his definition of smart people are people like himself. I mean, that's the problem, is that whatever one want to call it, there's an aristocracy, a coastal aristocracy whose ontological truth they think is universal, which probably isn't.
Then we can go all the way back to Plato's Republic, Andrew.
Let's not go back to Plato's Republic, because this is a show about tech rather than philosophy. What are the big tech stories this week? Anything interesting?
A firm went public, which is the company formed by another member of the PayPal mafia.
Amazing, that PayPal mafia.
Yeah, so this is gosh, what's his name? I'm blanking.
Russian guy.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name now. I'll tell you. Max Levchin.
Yeah,
Max Levchin, who's a great guy, by the way, very smart. And a firm, sadly, is in the money lending business. So
why sadly? Is it a scam, do you think?
Well, I think money lending in general is a place
banks
where
lend money.
You make money by making it available for people who need it,
especially the people desperate. What about? I mean, the other story this week, which is being overlooked because of our obsession with Trump, is the Bitcoin, the crypto story. What's your reading of the current crypto market? Is it insane euphoria, irrational euphoria, or is it real?
It's very real. As you know, I've been saying for a long time that I believe it's real. This is from the Wall Street Journal, the case for and against investing in Bitcoin. Backstory there is my brother-in-law in South Africa was telling me how much of an idiot I am for putting anything into Bitcoin. Bitcoin right now is sitting at $36,690 per coin. I think last time we did the show, it was 17,000.
Well, I hope it paid for take your family to South Africa.
Well, probably.
But why? But can you explain this boom? I mean, who's driving it, and why would we think that it's any different from any of the other boom bust cycles of crypto?
It's basically large institutions. An example is the Greycroft Trust. The Greycroft Trust has a traded trust. So on your e-trader account, you can go and buy GBTC, which is a securitized version of Bitcoin. They have bought $20 billion worth of Bitcoin in the last few months. JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, high net worth individuals. There's a lot of demand for exchange traded funds, ETFs in the Bitcoin space. So real, very large scale institutional money seeing Bitcoin as a gold-like store of value that is a hedge against the dollar's decline, especially as the dollar is being printed in greater volume. The currency is being turned into paper, clearly.
And then we have Square and PayPal that are the bridge between the abstraction of a digital currency and the real world of allowing people to actually use it. Is that fair?
Yeah, and Robinhood, PayPal, Robinhood, and Square are all, and Revolut. They're all enabling.
How can Jack Dorsey do? I know this is a question that everyone thinks themselves. How can Jack Dorsey possibly do two jobs? Is that why he has such a long beard? He doesn't have time to shave. I mean, how can he run both Twitter and Square? I don't understand it.
Here's the secret, Andrew. CEOs don't have full-time jobs mostly. The CEO, especially if they're good, their whole goal is to reduce down to a minimum the amount of time they need to spend because they build great teams who know what they're doing. And Dorsey seems to be a great CEO. And
well, maybe Dorsey is the next Steve Jobs. And another of your old friends, someone who I always struggle to pronounce, Chamath Palihapitiya, apparently is the new Warren Buffett. Tell me about this, Keith. Another interesting piece that you linked to your newsletter this month.
Yeah. So this is about the cost of capital. So if you think about being an investor, normally you raise money, it has a cost. And Warren Buffett and Chamath share in common, this article claims, that they both figured out how to get capital for nothing. So basically, people give you money. You go and put that money into assets, which you own part of, but you didn't pay anything for the asset yourself. So that is basically what a SPAC is. A SPAC is, Keith, I'm going to ask you $500 million. You'll give it to me. I'll give you 80% ownership in my thing, not 100%. I'll give you 80% for the money. So I've got 20%. Now I'm going to use your money and go and buy something. And I'll continue to own my portion of it, which I didn't pay for.
Sounds a bit too good to be true, Keith. These things always collapse. Is it?
No, it isn't, because the key is the asset seller. This week, for example, Clover Health publicly traded as a result of a SPAC that Chamath did. Clover Health is worth billions of dollars, and it really is. And he owns a piece of it that he didn't pay for.
I guarantee you one thing, Keith. The SPAC thing will end in tears. I don't know how or when or why, but it will do. These things that seem to involve no risk and upside for everyone always end in tears.
Let me tell you my personal story. This is not investment advice, but it is explaining to you how it works. Chamath has ticker symbols called IPOD, IPOE, IPOF. You can go and type them in. You can buy them today. They were $10 each when they first listed. They're now somewhere between $15 and $20 because they've all gone up. Each one of those is going to merge with a well-known company in the next few months. I invested in all of them, 6 of them, when they were $10, and every single one has at least gone up 40% and mostly over 100% in the time. And anyone can do it. You could go do it too.
To quote Bob Dylan, we're all weathermen and I smell a storm. We'll come back to this, Keith, later. We know our startup of the week, which is Levchin's Affirm, the lending platform that's went public. One of your tweets of the week is Chamath, which says canceling Trump is nuts. So in one sense, Chamath seems to be fairly down to earth. What's your other tweet of the week?
Well, they're related. It's David Sachs and Chamath. And these two, along with Jason Calacanis and David Freiberg, do a podcast, which is in this week's newsletter. It's a YouTube video cast called All In. And they had a huge fallout over the Capitol invasion. And David Sachs and Chamath came down on the side of openness. And Jason and especially David Freiberg came down on the side of closing down Parler and Trump and so on. So it's a really good thing. And this tweet is evidence that after that podcast, the controversy keeps on living. David Sachs saying, defending Parler by explaining that they did have terms and conditions that prevented violent, explicit or implicit encouragement to violence. Then it also goes on and talks about when all of the tech companies band together to ban these things, it's like a monopolistic cartel, which Chamath replies to, yes, the internet's gone nuts, effectively canceling Trump, it's nuts. And then finally, the third tweet in Tweet of the Week is Sachs responding to Jack Dorsey's tweet stream yesterday very positively, which I added all those because I think what it tells us is conversation leads to outcomes that are different from the starting point. These 3 tweets show a development of a thought process between people who disagree. And so they're my tweets of the week because they demonstrate the power of conversation.
Yeah, all good. I hope Chamath, I would rather Chamath invests his energy rather than in sort of Ponzi-like schemes, to me, like SPACs, and actually trying to figure out a way to fix some of this stuff, because clearly there's a huge problem. I mean, Kara's right in that sense. It doesn't mean shutting down social media, and it doesn't mean eliminating Trump's Twitter feed, but we do have to address it. And I think these people, I wouldn't say they have a moral responsibility, but they have the resources and the understanding and the sophistication to come up with some solutions. Maybe they should be investing their money in new media startups of some
Andrew, I was going to say, Andrew, if people look at the conversation you and I have had over the months, I certainly have evolved. I agree with you today that
I've devolved.
There is a problem, and the problem is there are no rules for social media at all. There's no laws that they are part of, and it's an easy.
And I think, and the way I'm thinking more and more is that it's not even the laws; it's the manner in which people do social media, the intolerance, the arrogance, the weird way in which they talk to one another. We don't talk to one another like this in real life.
But it isn't.
Again, it comes back to the challenge of how do we replicate real life in social media? We haven't done a very good job. I don't know how to do it.
I don't think you can. I think it's when people have computer screens in between them.
Well, we've got a computer screen now. We're not in the same room.
No, but I'm saying once there's a computer screen, strangers discussing can scream at each other with no consequence. If they did it in the street, there'd be a fist fight. So. Yeah. I think it is quite like the real world. It's just modified by the.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing I dislike most about Trump. I mean, I can't stand his racism or his America First stuff, but most of all, I hate his manner.
Yeah.
It's a sort of a narcissism in which the only thing that's good is in his interest. He has no moral compass or moral interest in anything, and that's somehow been replicated now. And you can't ban that. Yeah. And you can't re-educate people. And people say, "Oh, we're going to need more education." I don't know where to start. So maybe this will be something we come back to time and time again. It's 2021. We finally got rid of 2020, Keith. We haven't talked about COVID, but there's a possibility there may be light at the end of the tunnel, and we will look forward to coming back a week's time, January the 22nd, when Joe Biden will be president, and hopefully we can forget about Donald Trump. So have a great week, Keith, and I'll check in with you next week. Same time, same place.
Thanks, Andrew.